Hello everyone, and welcome back to CRT's Cozy Corner, Shakespeare Edition! Now, the past couple of weeks we've dug deep with some Shakespearean tragedies, so today I thought we should lighten the mood and get back to a fun comedy. So today we will be reading As You Like It. So, if you're ready, go ahead and take a deep breath. Did you take a deep breath, Luna? And let's get started. I show more mirth than I am feeling, Rosalind grumbled to her friend Celia. And you tell me to be even merrier? Unless you can teach me to forget a banished father, you should not expect me to be merry at all. As Rosalind walked through the palace gardens with Celia, her cousin, as well as her best friend, merriment wasn't the utmost in her mind. Her father, Duke Senior, had been banished from the court for treason by Celia's father, Duke Frederick. While Rosalind lived in her uncle's palace, she could not forget what he had done. "What my father has taken away from yours, I will give you back," Celia told her, smiling so sweetly that it was impossible for Rosalind to feel completely miserable. "Therefore, my sweet Roz, be merry." "I will," Rosalind promised. There was no point dwelling on her father's banishment. "We just need a distraction," she said, as a messenger came racing into the garden. "3 brothers," he announced, panting. "The wrestler Charles has just broken the ribs of 3 brothers. I doubt they'll live to see tomorrow. And now another man has challenged him. Come and see the fight." "I learn something new every day," said Touchstone, the court jester, who had strolled into the garden behind the messenger. "That's the first time I've heard breaking ribs described as a sport for ladies." "Me too," admitted Celia. "Isn't there anyone else who longs to see it?" said Rosalind, convinced it was just the distraction she needed. Celia could never say no to her best friend. Soon the 2 women were sitting beside the ring, their eyes on the wrestler Charles, a man built like a minotaur, as he warmed up. Outside the ring stood the challenger, a mild, lean-looking youth who was surely about to lose his life. "I tried to persuade the young man not to fight," Duke Frederick told Rosalind and Celia as he swept in to take his seat. "He won't listen to me. Speak to him, ladies. Perhaps you can change his mind." So Rosalind called him over. "Young man, do not fight," she begged him. "If I die," the young man replied, "I shall do my friends no wrong, since I have none. I shall do the world no injury, for I have nothing." Rosalind was taken aback, both by his melancholy confession and his handsome face. "Then I hope you do well," she said. "The little strength I have, I wish it were with you." "Come on," roared Charles, beating his chest. "Where's this young man who's so eager to die?" The challenger, Orlando, walked into the ring, his head held up high. He took a run at Charles, but the giant lifted him up and tossed him over his shoulder. Rosalind gasped as he crashed to the ground. A few feet away, a man in the audience smiled. That man was Oliver, Orlando's older brother. He was taking great pleasure in the thought of his brother's imminent death. Oliver had always loathed Orlando. He didn't know why he hated him so much. Oliver had grown up with wealth, education, and anything else he could want. After their father had died, Oliver had made sure his younger brother had had none of those things. But there was still something about Orlando that set his teeth on edge. Soon he consoled himself. Orlando would be gone. The previous night, he had made Charles promise that Orlando would not survive the fight. He had had to tell a few white lies to persuade him, but it was worth it. Now, he watched as Charles lunged towards Orlando and frowned as Orlando dodged him and jumped up onto his back. Rosalind cheered as the 2 men grappled. Charles roared, his face flushed purple, unable to shake Orlando off. To everyone's astonishment, the giant toppled and crashed onto the ground. The crowd roared. It was impossible. Orlando had defeated Charles. When the applause had died down, Duke Frederick asked the challenger who he was. Orlando, the youngest son of the late Sir Roland de Boys, Orlando replied when he was able to speak. I wish you were someone else, the Duke said coldly. Your father was my enemy when he was alive. Anyway, I commend you for your valor. As the crowd dispersed, Rosalind approached the young man. Sir, you did well, she said softly. You have overthrown more than your enemies. Orlando wanted to reply. Instead, he stared at Rosalind. Say something, he thought. Anything. But no words would form. Then Rosalind placed her necklace around his neck. Wear this for me, she said. Once more, Orlando tried to reply. His mouth was opening and shutting like that of a fish. But no sound came out. Shall we go? Said Celia. You fool! Orlando berated himself when Rosalind had gone. Something stronger than Charles has overthrown you. Back in her room in the Duke's palace, Celia discovered that Rosalind had fallen madly in love. Is it possible that you love him so suddenly? Celia asked. Why not? Said Rosalind. My father loved his father dearly. And so you love his son? Celia frowned. But my father hates Orlando's father. It doesn't follow that I hate Orlando. You have to love him because I do, Rosalind insisted. They would have gone on talking about the merits of Orlando for several hours, but had they not been interrupted by Duke Frederick, who marched in and barked at Rosalind. Be gone from my court at once. You are not wanted here. Rosalind gasped at her uncle in astonishment. Hours ago, no, minutes ago, he had been perfectly polite to her. Tell me what I've done to offend you, dear uncle. You are your father's daughter. That's enough. Treason is not inherited, my lord, she replied. If Rosalind is a traitor, then so am I, Celia declared. Father, all our lives we have played together, eaten together. Her silence and her patience both speak to the people, and they pity her, Frederick told his daughter. You will seem more virtuous when she is gone. You'll have to banish me too, Celia cried, for I cannot live without her. You are a fool, Frederick replied. Then he turned to Rosalind. Unless you leave, you die. When her father had gone, Celia said, Shall we leave together? Let my father find another heir. Cheer up. If you go, I go. And if we go together, we'll be going to freedom and not to banishment. But where will we go? Rosalind asked desolately. To see your father in the forest of Arden, said Celia, and just like that it was settled. They had made a plan to flee to the forest, where Rosalind's father was living in exile. Better still, they would go in disguise. Rosalind grinned. She would dress as a shepherd. An ox upon my thigh, a boar spear in my hand, she said. Whatever woman's fears are in my heart, I still look every inch a gallant man. As, in fact, many cowardly men do, who hide their fears beneath their outfits. What shall I call you when you're a man? Celia asked. Ganymede, Rosalind replied, suddenly inspired. And you? I'll be Alina, said Celia, a simple shepherdess. They agreed to ask Touchstone, the court jester, to help them on their journey, and waited until it was dark to make their escape. The following day, Duke Frederick turned purple with fury when he discovered they were missing. A maid had overheard Rosalind talking about Orlando, and the Duke was soon convinced that he was somehow behind it all. He sent for Orlando's brother, Oliver, and commanded him to find the women, and to bring Orlando to him, dead or alive. Dead, thought Oliver. I'll bring him dead. That afternoon, when Orlando walked home, he found his father's old servant, Adam, standing outside his door. You can't stay here, Adam warned him. Oliver's going to burn your house to the ground tonight with you in it. Then where should I go? Asked Orlando. He had nothing in the world, no plans, no money, no refuge. Perhaps he should just stay and face his brother's spite. Let me go with you, the old man said. I have 500 crowns. I saved the money years ago when I served your father. It will help us on our way. Orlando was astonished. So there are still some kind souls in this cruel world, he thought. He took Adam's hand in his. Let's go along together, he said, and when the money's spent, we'll find some simple way to live and be content. So they set out together, not knowing where they'd end up. Rosalind plucked one piece of parchment off of a tree, and another, and another. The trees were covered in poems. Someone must have spent all night writing them. The first one read, "From the east to western end, no jewel is like Rosalind. Let no face be kept in mind, but that of fairest Rosalind." She showed Touchstone, who didn't think much of it. Tim poetry was a pastime for fools with more love than talent. "I found them on a tree," she grinned. "Then the tree is yielding bad fruit," said Touchstone. But Rosalind didn't care. She knew they weren't great poems or even good poems, but someone had written them. Someone who was in love with her. "I remember when I was in love," said Touchstone ruefully. "I broke my sword, attacked a stone that I mistook for a lover visiting my mistress at night. I even kissed the cow's udder that her pretty hands had milked." He sighed. "We who are true lovers certainly do some strange things." Ever so casually, Celia mentioned that she had seen the poet hanging the poems on the tree. "Who is it?" Rosalind shrieked. Celia laughed. "You don't know?" "Who?" demanded Rosalind. "Come on, you must know. You gave him a necklace." "Who? Is it a man?" said Rosalind. "This is incredible," giggled Celia, shaking her head. "Tell me," Rosalind shouted. "Why is your mouth stopped like a corked bottle? Pour the knowledge out." Celia took a deep breath. "It was Orlando, the boy who tripped up the giant and your heart in a single instant." "No," gasped Rosalind. "Orlando," Celia repeated. "Orlando," breathed Rosalind. Then she began to speak very, very fast. "But what shall I do with my men's clothes? Did you see him? How did he look? Where did he go? Where is he now? Did he ask for me? When will you see him again? Answer me in one word." Celia creased herself laughing. "Even if I had a giant's mouth, I could not begin to answer you in one word." Then, just as Celia began to describe how she had seen Orlando, the man himself appeared, strolling through the forest with another man who was dressed from head to foot in black. Orlando had found Duke Signor and his friends in the forest. They had given Orlando and Adam food and shelter. Now Orlando was deep in conversation with Duke Signor's friend Jacques, who was the most melancholy man in the forest, if not the entire kingdom. "I beg you, ruin no more trees with your verses," Jacques was telling him exasperatedly. "I beg you, ruin no more of my poems by mocking them so cruelly," Orlando replied. "Rosalind is your love's name?" asked Jacques. Orlando nodded. "I do not like the name," said Jacques. "I do not think that anyone was thinking of you when she was christened," Orlando fumed. Jacques took a good look at the young man. "The problem you have is love," Jacques told him. "I would not change it for any blessing you have," said Orlando curtly. "I am weary of you." Jacques shrugged. "I was looking for a fool when I found you." "Go and look in the river," Orlando retorted. "You'll see him." "I'll see myself," said Jacques. "Precisely." Jacques decided he had had enough of this young man. "Adieu, Monsieur Love," he said, and trampled off through the forest. "Adieu, Monsieur Melancholy," Orlando called after him. Once Orlando was alone, Rosalind cleared her throat and tried out her best impression of a man's voice. "Forster, come here." To her amazement, Orlando obeyed. To Rosalind's further astonishment and delight, they were soon deep in conversation. Her disguise was working, but Orlando knew there was something not quite right about this young man. "Your accent is very fine for someone who lives in these woods," he said. "An old religious uncle taught me to speak," Rosalind improvised. "He taught me many things, such as not to fall in love. You know, there's a lovesick youth haunting this forest. He keeps writing poems on the trees. If I met him, I'd tell him." "I am he," Orlando admitted. Rosalind looked Orlando up and down. "No," she said. "My uncle taught me how to recognize a man in love. You're not showing the signs." "The signs? What signs?" Orlando spluttered. "You should have sunken eyes, a neglected beard, untied shoes, unbuttoned sleeves. Everything about you should show careless desolation. But you look as if you love yourself.
not another." "I am that unfortunate," Orlando replied. "I wish I could make you believe it. Neither rhyme nor reason can express how much I love Rosalind." Rosalind pretended to disapprove, although hearing these words made her almost dizzy with happiness. "Love is a madness," she said, "but I can cure it." "Go on." "I once knew a lovesick man," said Rosalind. "Every day I told him to woo me, and if I was his love, one day I'd smile, then I'd weep, then I'd ignore him. I'd love him, hate him, smile at him, and so I drove him from the madness of love to living madness. Finally, he decided to become a monk," she said with satisfaction. "I don't want to be cured," Orlando said emphatically. "I'd cure you if you would woo me every day," Rosalind said. Orlando considered the matter. He did not want to be cured, but this young man had a very fair face, an appealing manner, a sweet, teasing smile, and such bright eyes they reminded him somehow of his beloved Rosalind. Perhaps he could learn to woo Rosalind by wooing Ganymede. "Very well, I will," he agreed. That night, Rosalind, Celia, and Touchstone stayed in a pretty little cottage in the forest. It was a delightful place, although Touchstone still managed to find things to complain about. Rosalind, on the other hand, couldn't keep the smile off her face. But the next morning, as she waited for Orlando to arrive, the smile faded fast. He was late by a whole 3 minutes. "He said he would come and he didn't," she cried. Celia shrugged. In her experience, love's eternal oaths didn't usually last that long. When Orlando finally did appear, 4 minutes later, Rosalind was short with him. "You are slower than a snail. In fact, I'd rather be wooed by a snail." "Why is that?" Orlando asked. "At least he'd bring his house with him." But Rosalind couldn't stay angry with him for long. "What would you do if Rosalind said she would not have you?" she asked him playfully. "I would die," Orlando replied, utterly serious. Rosalind burst out laughing. "Men have died and been buried for the worms to eat, but not for love." "Even Rosalind's frown would kill me," Orlando protested. "It would not kill a fly," she laughed. "Come, I'll play Rosalind in a lighter mood. Ask me something, and I will give it to you." "Love me," begged Orlando, pleading as sincerely as if the real Rosalind was standing before him. He trembled as he gazed at Ganymede. Those luminous eyes, that fair skin, that sweet voice, that joyful laugh. As the youth stood before him, Orlando could almost imagine that Ganymede was, in fact, Rosalind. "I will love you on Fridays and Saturdays," Rosalind said cheekily. "I'll love you and 20 others like you." "What?" said Orlando, jolted out of his haze of happiness. "Well, can you really have too much of a good thing?" Rosalind said, and then she called Celia over. "Come, cousin, we are going to be married." A few minutes later, Celia was playing the part of the priest, and Orlando was married to his Rosalind. "Now you've married Rosalind, how long will you love her?" Rosalind asked Orlando. "Forever and a day," said Orlando. "Try a day without the ever," said Rosalind, "for I'll be as jealous as a pigeon. I'll squawk like a parrot. I'll be as lusty as a monkey. I'll weep when you want to be merry. I'll laugh like a hyena just when you want to go to sleep." "But Rosalind is wise," Orlando said, tormented by this youth's words. He knew the real Rosalind would be pure and perfect in every way. "Oh, she will do as much the same as I do," Rosalind said casually, with utmost confidence. Eventually, the bamboozled Orlando left Ganymede to visit Duke Senior. Far from being cured, he felt more intoxicated by his love than before. But was it love for Rosalind or Ganymede? He didn't even know. He only knew that he was deeply in love. He felt as if he could drown in it. As she watched Orlando go, Rosalind sighed. "My love is like the Bay of Portugal. No one knows how deep it is." "You should have your disguise plucked right off so the world could see what you've done to that poor boy," Celia scolded. "You don't know how much I love him," Rosalind replied. "I'll go and find some shade to sit in, and I'll sigh till he comes back." "Sounds fascinating," thought Celia. "I'll go to sleep." But when it was time for Orlando to return, a different man appeared, brandishing a bloody handkerchief. "This is from Orlando," he told the two women. Then he began to relate a strange tale. "When he left you, Orlando came across a man asleep under a tree. A snake was wound around his neck. As Orlando crept closer, he saw that this man was his own brother, Oliver. As he approached, the snake slid away into some bushes where a lioness was hiding, about to pounce on the sleeping man." "And then," said Rosalind, her heart in her mouth, Orlando had told her about his hateful, murderous brother. "Did Orlando leave his brother to the lioness?" "He tried, twice, but kindness, stronger than revenge, made him battle the lioness. He killed the beast, and it fell. The man awoke, or rather should I say, I awoke." "You are his brother?" said Rosalind. "I was, but I'm not the wretch I was before," Oliver replied humbly. "Orlando's love has changed me. We are reconciled." "But the handkerchief, whose blood is that?" asked Rosalind, staring fearfully at the dark red stains. "Wounded by the lioness, Orlando sent this handkerchief," Oliver said. "He gasped in surprise as the young shepherd he was talking to fainted onto the floor with a thump." "Ganymede!" hissed Celia, prodding Rosalind to wake her up. "Lots of people faint when they see blood," Oliver said reassuringly when Rosalind's eyes fluttered open. "You're a man. You just lack a man's heart." "I was, only pretending to faint," protested Rosalind, but she remained very pale, and only really revived when Oliver went on to tell her that Orlando had only suffered a wound in his arm, and that she could visit him later that day. When she did, she had some surprising news to share with Orlando. Over the course of that afternoon, Alina and Oliver had fallen in love. No sooner had they looked that they sighed. No sooner they sighed than loved. Rosalind told Orlando, "In short, they're getting married tomorrow." Orlando was happy for his brother, so long his enemy, now his friend, and yet how bitter it is to look at love through another man's eyes. "Tomorrow my heart will be heavy." "Tomorrow I can't play, Rosalind?" asked Rosalind. "I can no longer live by thinking," said Orlando. Besides, he thought, his feelings for Ganymede had become too confusing. Simply standing near the young man made his heart race. "Believe, then, that I can do strange things," Rosalind told him. She took a deep breath. What she was about to say was a lie, and yet there was some truth in it. "Since I was 3 years old, I have known a magician, and he has taught me many things. And if your heart cries out for Rosalind, tomorrow you shall marry her." "You really mean it?" said Orlando. "I do," said Rosalind. She grinned at Orlando. If all went well, he would soon have her heart's desire. But not everyone in the forest of Arden was happy. Near Rosalind's cottage there lived a shepherdess named Phoebe, who had fallen madly in love with a handsome young shepherd named Ganymede. She kept sending him poems, endless verses that made Orlando's clumsy efforts seem like masterpieces. Just after Rosalind had promised Orlando that he would marry his Rosalind tomorrow, Phoebe arrived, fell to her knees, and declared undying love for Ganymede. It was not a moment that Rosalind enjoyed, and it was made even more awkward by the pained young man sitting next to Phoebe. He was a shepherd named Civilis, who had loved Phoebe for as long as he could remember. "Love Civilis," Rosalind advised Phoebe. "He worships you." But Phoebe ignored Civilis, gazing still at Rosalind. "To love is to be full of tears and sighs, as I am for Phoebe," said Civilis. "And I for Ganymede," sighed Phoebe. "And I for Rosalind," echoed Orlando. "And I for no woman," Rosalind said. "To love," said Civilis, "is to be made of fantasy, and of all wishes, all adoration, humbleness, patience, and impatience, all purity, all trial, all obedience, as I am for Phoebe." "As I am for Ganymede," said Phoebe. "As I am for Rosalind," breathed Orlando. "Stop!" cried Rosalind. "It's like wolves howling at the moon." She turned to Phoebe. "I would love you if I could," she said. "If ever I marry a woman, it'll be you. And I'll be married tomorrow." The love-struck Phoebe nodded. "I would marry you," Phoebe said, "even if I had to die that very hour." "If you refuse to marry me in the end, will you marry your faithful Civilis?" Rosalind asked, and Phoebe nodded. Next, Rosalind turned to Orlando.
I'll satisfy you, if ever I satisfied a man, and you'll be married tomorrow. Finally, she turned to Civilis. I'll content you, if what pleases you contents you, and you'll be married tomorrow. So they all vowed happily to meet the following day. There was only one thing left for Rosalind to do. Still disguised as Ganymede, she went to find her father. Since she was going to be married tomorrow, she thought she probably should at least mention it to him. In the forest, Duke Senior had found a life of sweet simplicity. Although it had pained him to be exiled, he didn't miss the flattery or lies of court politics. And when he heard Orlando's sad tale, it reminded him that others were far worse off than himself. The world's wide theater presents much sadder scenes than the ones we're in, he remarked to Jacques. All the world's a stage, and all the men and women are merely players, Jacques replied. They have their exits and their entrances, and one man in his time plays many parts. Here are the 7 ages of man. First, he's a bawling infant. Second, a whining schoolboy. Third, he's a singing lover. Fourth, a proud soldier. Fifth, he's a wise, fat judge. Sixth, he's a shrunken old man. And last of all comes a second childishness and oblivion. As Jacques fell silent, 2 of these ages of man, the lover and the old man, presented themselves. It was Orlando and his faithful servant Adam, who had been invited to dinner. Duke Senior welcomed them, and they sat down to eat. The more the Duke got to know Orlando, the son of his dear friend, the better he liked him. And so, when a young man named Ganymede came along, asking whether he would approve of the match between Orlando and his daughter, Rosalind, he didn't hesitate to agree. But where is Rosalind, he said, filled with longing to see his beloved, clever daughter. The youth smiled. If I bring your Rosalind here tomorrow, you will allow her to marry Orlando? He asked again. I would, Duke Senior confirmed cheerfully. And if I had a kingdom to give her, I'd do that too. And so the stage was set. The next day, Oliver and Alina were about to be married, and Phoebe, Civilis, and Orlando were all waiting nervously to see if they would be able to marry their true loves, when Rosalind appeared in her own clothes. If there is any truth in sight, you are my Rosalind, Orlando said, marveling at the sight before him. If there is any truth in sight, you are my daughter, cried Duke Senior, rushing to embrace her. Standing next to him, Phoebe burst into tears. If shape and sight are true, then loved you, she sobbed. But now Ganymede was gone forever. She found to her surprise that her love for him vanished as quickly as she had. She turned to Civilis and saw his pained, patient face as she had never seen it before. Let us be married, she said. Your loyalty has won my heart. Just as the ceremony was about to begin, a messenger rode in, looking for Duke Senior. Duke Frederick has come to the forest to kill his brother, he announced. But on the edges of the forest, he met a monk who dissuaded him from his quest. Now he has given up his crown to his banished brother and plans to spend the rest of his days in the forest as a holy man. At these words, everyone leaped to their feet, cheering. Rosalind and her father looked at one another, their faces alight with joy. It meant they could at last go home. Come, brides and bridegrooms, play music and dance, Duke Senior commanded. At this, the crowd cheered again, apart from Jacques, who despised dancing, and quickly bid everyone farewell. But before the music started up, Rosalind stepped forward. It is not the fashion for a woman to speak at a wedding, but it is no less handsome than a speech from a man. So I say to all the women, please enjoy this feast as much as you like, and to all the men, enjoy it as much as you like too. Taking Orlando's hand, spun him around and led him in a jig. As they whirled, more and more people joined in, until the whole forest was filled with the sound of music, laughter, and love. The end. So happy and joyful. I hope that you have an excellent week, and we will see you next time. Bye.